Today, I'll show you how I paint a bush in Photoshop. Not randomly, but using a clear form and light system. We'll start with a simple sphere, break down light, shadow and reflected light. Then transform that into leaf masses. And finally build a full bush on a decorative brick base. This method works great for illustration, game art and concept art. To start, let's create a palette of auxiliary colors that will be useful in the later stages of the process. Using a sphere as our base example, let's walk through the lighting logic behind painting a bush. I begin by creating a simple sphere and defining the light source. In this case, the light comes from the right side, so the illuminated area stays on the right, while the halftones and core shadows naturally fall to the left. It's also important not to forget the reflected light. Here, I add a subtle cool green bounce light inside the shadow to keep the form feeling natural and dimensional. I duplicate the sphere layer to use it as a base for building up the foliage. From there, I start developing the leaves directly over the form. I mainly work with a standard round brush. I rarely rely on textured brushes because a simple brush gives me cleaner control over volume, lighting and edge transitions. Notice the shadows are not just darker, they also have color. Reflected light brings life into the form. If this stage works, the bush will feel three-dimensional even without details. I block in a simple brick pedestal and a rough curve shape to create a base where the bush will sit. This helps establish placement, scale and grounding so the bush feels naturally integrated into its environment. Once the base is established, I create a new layer and begin placing spheres of different sizes to build the structure. I could go straight into painting the bush volumes. But here I want to clearly demonstrate how simple primitive forms helps us understand and control a complex final shape. That's why I intentionally painted a clean sphere at the beginning, so I can duplicate it into separate layers, resize it, and arrange it into a clustered mass. This method makes the overall volume and silhouette of the future bush much easier to read before moving on to more detailed foliage works. So you just need to imagine the bush as a cloud of little balls. Each has its own light and shadow. Now I begin to break the perfect sphere shape. In nature, there is no ideal geometry. Organic forms are always irregular, layered, and slightly chaotic. Instead of keeping the outline smooth, I start pushing and pulling the silhouette, adding bumps and uneven edges. This distortion will become future leaf clusters and volume groups. At this stage, I'm not thinking about individual leaves at all. My focus is on mass and structure. I reshape the sphere into several overlapping forms, varying their size and direction so the bush doesn't feel flat or symmetrical. Some areas bulge outward toward the light, others sink inward into shadow. This creates rhythm and depth early in the process. Important principle here. I do not draw leaves one by one. I work with large and medium masses first. Each mass behaves like a mini sphere with its own light logic. Every bump must still respect the main light direction. I keep the light side more open and the shadow side more compressed. Think of this bush as a cloud made of many small spheres grouped together. Each one catches light differently, has its own halftone and shadow edge, and slightly overlaps the others. When you build foliage this way, the final result feels dimensional and believable even before adding any leaf detail. Next we move on to creating the stone masonry, in which the bush will grow. The base color has already been applied and now it is necessary to mark the mortar joints of the brickwork following a checkerboard pattern. After that, following the same pattern and mimicking natural variation, some bricks are highlighted with a lighter tone, while the others are left in the original darker shade. This approach helps achieve a realistic texture closely resembling natural stone masonry. Add a touch of light by highlighting the top edges of the bricks. This technique helps give the bricks more volume and enhances the overall three-dimensional effects. Now we are going to add some details to the curb to make it look more realistic. First, let's focus on the potholes. Take your brush and define small depressions along the surface. Remember, lighting is key. Here add shadows in the deeper areas and subtle highlights along the edges. This will give your potholes a believable three-dimensional look. Next, we'll add some dirt spots. Dirt is never uniform, so use a soft semi-transparent brush and apply small irregular spots across the curb. Vary the size, opacity and placement to make it look natural. Finally, gently blend the edges where needed so everything sits nicely on the curb's surface. This will help integrate the potholes and dirt, giving the curb a realistic worn appearance. Now we move on to painting the foliage on the bush. Start by identifying the shadowed areas and apply a darker green to these parts. This establishes the depth and form of the bush, making it look three-dimensional. Don't just fill in the shadows, uniformly vary the darkness slightly across different sections to mimic the natural irregularity of leaves. Next, focus on the transition from shadow to midtones. Here is where you begin adding individual leaves. Use short, controlled brush strokes that follow the natural growth pattern of the bush. Layer your strokes gradually, starting with leaves that are more recessed, then adding ones that are closer to the light source. This layering technique creates a sense of density and realism. As you work, pay attention to how light interacts with the foliage. Some leaves will catch subtle highlights, especially along the edges or on tips facing the light. Use a slightly lighter green for this, but avoid overdoing it. Real leaves rarely have perfectly uniform highlights. Finally, step back and evaluate the overall balance. You may need to soften some edges or add tiny clusters of leaves to make the bush appear fuller. The key is to build it up gradually, layer by layer, so the final result looks natural with depth, texture, and a convincing play of light and shadow. In the final stage, I focus on refining the highlights on the bush. I use a bright, almost yellowish green to paint individual leaves that catch the light. By carefully layering these lighter tones on top of the midtones and shadows, I create a sense of depth and volume, making the foliage appear lush and three-dimensional. Pay attention to the direction of light leaves. Facing the light source should have more pronounced highlights, while those in shadow remain darker, maintaining natural contrast. At the same time, I enhance the subtle light reflection along the edge of the bricks. These highlights help define the form of each brick, emphasizing the texture and creating a more realistic sense of volume. Small variation in tone along the edges make the masonry feels natural rather than uniform. Next, I move to the ground area where the bush is planted, using thin, delicate brushstrokes in lighter green tones. I paint individual blades of grass, layering them over the darker base soil color. This layering adds a soft, organic texture and integrates the bush naturally into the environment. To bring additional life and visual interest to the composition, I add small flowers around the bush. I select warm orange tones and soft purple-pink hues to create contrast with the green foliage. The flowers are scattered irregularly, imitating natural growth patterns, and their subtle highlights are applied to suggest gentle sunlight hitting the petals. This small accent prevents the scene from looking flat or monotonous, adding charm and richness to the overall piece. By carefully combining these techniques, highlighting leaves, refining bricks edges, detailing grass, and adding flowers, the final composition achieves a balanced, vibrant and realistic appearance, with a convincing interplay of light, shadow and color throughout the scene. And that's it. Our scene is complete, full of depth, color and life. Keep practicing, experiment with lights and textures, and don't be afraid to add your own personal touches. Every detail brings your art closer to reality, so keep creating. See ya!